Welcome tonight. I'm Bill Boshears in the Scizone tonight. Thank you for joining me. Things happening all over the country. Next week, we're going to get started early because of the timing of things and the amount of time we have to devote to this. This topic is probably tonight one of the most talked about, most written about, and most investigated, and yet so far behind the curve. There are a few people who have written, not few, it's probably the most prolific topic that has ever been written about, and it is the death of JFK, and that anniversary is coming up next week. And in honor of that, and it's the need for information on it, tonight my good friend Jim Fetzer. Jim, are you there, sir?
I sure am, Bill. It's a great pleasure to be on with you.
It's a pleasure to have you, Jim. The first of the books, by the way, my guest, Jim Fetzer, these are his books. The Assassination Scene. Jim, I'm fascinated with you because of the way you put the books together. You took it phase by phase. Most people just sort of throw the whole thing up on the wall and let it, if it sticks, it sticks. But you really went in depth in this book, man. You covered things that I haven't seen in other books.
Yeah, well, in assassination science, I brought together 11 experts on different aspects of the case.
Yeah.
And what we began to do was to rebuild it from the ground up. We actually went back to the original autopsy x-rays, the autopsy photographs, the autopsy report, and had the challenge of sorting out the authentic evidence from the inauthentic evidence, Bill. And what we discovered was that the so-called original x-rays in the National Archives are not originals, but they are copies that have been altered to conceal a massive blowout to the back of the head, for example. In another instance, they had a 6.5 millimeter metallic slice to implicate this weapon, this obscure Italian Mannlicher Carcano that Lee Oswald is alleged to have used, and to make other changes to the x-rays so that you couldn't understand what actually happened to JFK if you assumed they were authentic.
We have, or they, meaning the Warren Commission, they put everything inside the archives and somehow they lock all that up, and you and I and the rest of America are too damn dumb, or we are not capable of handling the truth that he was murdered by his own people in a coup d'etat. But Jim, am I saying something out of focus here?
Oh, no, Ed, you're absolutely right. If you look together at not only assassination science, which reports most importantly the findings about the x-rays, but if you look at murder in Dealey Plaza, where we're putting the whole case together, and finally at the great Zapruder film hoax, you'll discover that there was massive complicity by very important elements of the American government. We discovered, for example, more than 15 indications of the Secret Service setting the man up for the hit.
Wow. Now, the Zapruder film that you mentioned was bought off the market by CBS, was it not?
Oh, it was actually a Life magazine, Bill.
Was it? I'm sorry, I knew a magazine got into it.
Yeah.
But a dear friend of mine and yours, I think, Mr. Roy Schaefer in Dayton, Ohio, he and I crossed paths, and Roy has done more research on the Zapruder film than anybody I know of. It is way the hell over my head, but he counts the frames and so on and so forth, and he caught it when he told me the story. This is interesting. Roy was working the newspaper, and you know they used to send the pictures over a Gravera type. It would spin a cylinder and so on and so forth. So they sent him the pictures of assassination, and he begins to measure and count, and that's his job. He had to figure out what he was going to put in the paper. Come to find out, he said, wait a minute, this don't jive.
Well, what he did, Bill, was to count the blink pattern. The Lincoln limousine had a special series of lights on the front that blinked left, right, left, right, left, right, and he found there was inconsistencies in the blink pattern that could only have occurred from removing frames from the film. So it's a subtle matter that when they recreated the film, they didn't realize that the blink pattern could give them away. So by focusing on that, he was able to detect proof of the recreation of the film. We now have a massive amount of evidence, and in fact, as you know, there's a whole book, The Great Zapruder Film Hoax, that documents it.
I tell you what, of all the topics that I've covered over the years in the media, this is the most blatant cover-up of the corporate media that I've ever seen. Without a doubt, it was bought off, and it actually allowed them to, they actually did, this was a test run, and we have been under a state of siege ever since he was killed.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that, Bill, that, you know, the fact that we never got to the bottom of what happened to JFK, the fact that the elements of the government were able to take out the President of the United States in broad daylight in a major American city in front of hundreds of witnesses, and then by virtue of taking control of the body, they were able to manipulate the evidence by having agents of the FBI stationed at all the photo labs around Dallas for 2 weeks after the assassination so they could take the photos and films that were related to the assassination, replace them with a little card that said the government has your property. They were able to manipulate what information would eventually come to the American people. I'll tell you how bad it was, Bill. The very day of the assassination, 2 wounds were widely broadcast on radio and television. One was a shot to the throat. The other was a shot that entered the right temple and blew his brains out the back of his head. Now, both of those shots were fired from in front, but they were widely broadcast on radio and television. And you see Chet Huntley talking about how it was a simple matter of a bullet right through the head and attributing that finding to Admiral George Berkeley, the president's personal physician. Later in the evening, you have Frank McGee, and they've been talking all day about the wound to the throat, too. You have Frank McGee being told that the shooter was above and behind, and he says, well, you know, this is dumbfounding. How can the man have been shot from in front from behind?
You know, Jim, you and I are sitting here talking about something that a quarter of our population knows nothing about. Or probably
well, that's true because they weren't alive when Jack was assassinated.
I might make a suggestion to you.
Yeah.
And for those of you watching me tonight, think that this is something that is off the wall, I suggest you go get this at your local video store. It's JFK by Oliver Stone. It's the DVD. Get it, look at it. If you're to me, it's the finest movie ever made about this. And what really got me started into it, I was in California when it was released, and I couldn't believe the amount of coverage it got before it was released, and people saying, well, you know, he took way too much poetic license. It's just blatant lies.
Well, actually,
I couldn't find any lies.
Okay, and I organized this research group in 1992. In the wake of the controversy generated by the film, we have discovered that it's the most accurate, complete, and comprehensive presentation of what actually happened in Dealey Plaza ever presented to the American people through the mass media, except that it's too simple by half. There were actually shooters at 6 different locations. Oliver Stone shows 3.
And what you have to understand is that not one president since the beginning of this has ever opened it up and said, okay, we're going to get to the bottom of this. They did have a hearing, and they held some hearings to sort of appease us. That didn't work because what they came out with is, yes, there was some kind of a conspiracy. Jim, didn't they admit to other shooters or conspiracies? Or
what happened, Bill, is that in 1975, Robert Groden, a longtime student of the case, was able to talk Geraldo Rivera into showing the Zapruder film in the form we have it today on television. And because the Zapruder film in the form we have it today, which is far removed from the any original footage that may have been taken, shows a violent move by Jack back and to the left, back and to the left.
Back and to the left.
It also shows a kind of going forward and what looks like a big blob of his brains coming out, as though the right front of his face had been blown out. But this is all part of the fakery. The fact that the back and to the left motion was so violent and distinctive made the American people outraged, and the government had to have a reinvestigation by the House Select Committee on Assassinations from 1976, 77, actually 77, 78, and then they published their finding in 1979 that said that there had been an additional shot from the grassy knoll based upon acoustical recordings that were made by the police department.
Now, we're going to take a pause in the action. Jim Fetzer is my guest tonight. He's got 3 books that he's written over the years, and I suggest this, and he's got a DVD coming out. We'll get all that information to you right after this. Don't go away. My question to you was, the listening audience, where were you when it went down? And I'll be right back. I've lost my guest. I guess Jim called me back. I hit the wrong button. I'm getting senile in my old age. I apologize to him. Tonight, talking about the assassination of JFK. And where were you? It is the most talked about, most written about, most people, and a lot of people, young people, they have no clue that this was a coup d'etat, an out-and-out blatant murder. And it happened. This is our history. And it's not well covered. It's not well covered in our history books because it is so current. It's people like Jim Fetzer and the people who analyzed the evidence that make it so. And my guest, Jim Fetzer. Jim, thank you, and I apologize. I did not mean to drop you, sir.
Bill, no problem. You want to hear something amazing? I mean, just to talk about how current this is?
Go ahead.
There's another pseudo-documentary that's going to be broadcast tomorrow night on the Discovery Channel at 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, entitled JFK Inside the Target Car. And the people who have produced it claim that this puts JFK conspiracy theories to rest by proving that the fatal shot was fired from the book depository, Bill. Let me explain how they claim to have proven it.
Go ahead.
Here's a quote from an article you can find on MSNBC. Only 2 of the 486 Zapruder frames actually show Kennedy being shot. Computer graphics expert Doug Martin highlighted the red marks of the frames and the blood resulting from the wound and plotted them onto the computer simulation to see where the fatal shot had come from. But listen to this, Bill. No, you there?
Yeah, right here. Go ahead.
Roderick Ryan, who's a special effects expert, he actually won an Oscar for his contributions to cinema in the year 2000, told Noel Twyman, who was very bothered by the blob and the blood spray in frame 313 and 314, that they had been painted in. They'd been painted in. Get this, Bill, just to tell you how bad this is, Secret Service agents took a bucket and sponge and were washing the blood and brains out of the limousine already at Parkland Hospital after the assassination, and by Monday the vehicle had been taken back to Ford Motor Company where it was completely stripped down and all the interior was destroyed. So all we have is this film, which is a fake film. So what they're doing is a study based on features that were painted into frame 313 and 314.
Unbelievable. But that's the way they cover it up, Jim. That's the method of operation. It's the MO, and we see it in everything. Jim, we've seen this ever since it happened in every major event from, and I can go through them, I can tell you about it. We saw it in 9/11. We saw it in everything that the government has supposedly looked at, we see it. Maybe we don't see it right then, but a little later down the road, we go, whoa, wait. Look what happened at 9/11. Jim, you and I have talked about this more than any 2 people I know of. The point being is that the government and the people in that, shall we call them, a shadow government, whatever you want to call them, are too damn dumb to change their method of operation.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Would you believe up in Alaska, where they're trying to steal the election, they had the same discrepancy of a 61 to 39 vote discrepancy they used this year that they'd used 4 years ago, even though the votes were constantly changing, that percentage was remaining the same in favor of Stevens. It was outrageous. That's just one little illustration.
That's just one. That's just one. And it goes on and on and on. We saw it in Florida. We saw it in every major thing the government gets into. Oh, yeah, big time. Can we take some phone calls, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's go to John. You've been there the longest. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bill, I got a question for you. I can remember getting off the school bus when I was a kid back then.
Yeah.
And also, a couple years ago, I saw a gentleman on TV. He was talking about the fatal shot actually come from the sewer, up the side sewer part there, come up from there and into Kennedy's head and blew his head out the back of his head.
Well, if you get in the line of sight, that's a hell of a hard shot. He had to come up over the door.
I understand.
Well, Bill, there's an ambiguity there, okay? There's a ground level sewer down at the level of the curb. That has been speculated over, but does not appear to be a shooting location. On the other hand, there were two above-ground sewer locations on the north and south ends of the triple underpass.
Exactly.
And the shot he's talking about appears to have been fired from the north end of the triple underpass from the sewer location. It entered the right temple and blew out the back of his head.
Exactly.
You're right.
You're right. Hey, I stand corrected, man. I was thinking the other way around. John,
you want to look at some of the brilliant work of the. See, these books, I have actually edited them. I brought the best experts on different aspects of the case together, so you're not just getting my opinions. You're getting the opinions of 11 scholars in assassination Scots, 9 scholars in murder in Dealey Plaza, 6 scholars in the Great Zapruder film hoax. And I'll tell you, the stuff in the murder in Dealey Plaza includes the most brilliant analysis of the medical evidence you will ever read. It's one of the most stunning pieces of synthetic reasoning by David W. Mantic, who has both a PhD in physics and an MD. He's board certified in radiation oncology, which is a treatment of cancer using X-ray therapy. He is the guy who discovered the X-rays had been altered.
Wow. Jim, John, I appreciate your call, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a line open. Jump in, 381-3838. Let's go to Teresa. Teresa, you're there.
Hi, Bill.
Hi.
Hi. I actually was 6 years old. I was actually living in Dallas at the time.
Is that right?
Yes. And basically what I remember is the whole city was just like dead quiet. People couldn't even look at each other. They weren't speaking. I remember to this day just how quiet the whole city was.
I remember where I was sitting. I was at a stoplight with my sons, and when he came across the news. But more importantly, I appreciate it, Teresa. Thanks a bunch for that. I appreciate it. Jim, did they not? There's so much information that is a whirlwind around this. Johnson and LBJ's girlfriend came out. Johnson and the dinner that they had the night before the assassination.
Yep. You're talking about what appears to have been a ratification meeting at the home of Clinton Murchison the night before.
Exactly.
Madeline Duncan Brown, who was Lyndon's mistress. They began an affair in 1948. She bore him a son in 1950.
She did.
Not his only child out of wedlock, but his only male offspring. Madeline and I had over 100 conversations. And she told me how when she went out there, it was a small group, only about 24 people or so for a social event. J. Edgar Hoover was there. She thought it was in his honor. Richard Nixon was driven out there, she remembered, by a local Republican leader who worked in the same bank building where she had her office. We had George Brown at Brown and Root Heavy Construction. When the Vietnam War went down, Brown and Root was given $1 million to dredge a new bay at Cam Ranh Bay, even though Vietnam has many natural ports. Lately, John J. McCloy was there. He was our former High Commissioner to Germany. He had been the Chief Executive Officer at Chase Manhattan Bank. Late in the evening, Lyndon Johnson showed up, and these heavy hitters all disappeared into a conference room for 15 or 20 minutes. When it broke up, Lyndon came toward Madeline. She thought he was going to whisper sweet nothings in her ear. Instead, he told her in a hateful tone of voice that after tomorrow he wasn't going to have to put up with embarrassment from those Kennedy boys any longer.
And that, by the way, I have that on videotape of her telling that.
That's right. It was on The Men Who Killed Kennedy, the Part 9, The Guilty Men. Nigel Turner included it with a lot of corroborating evidence.
And this is the history that you're not going to get. And this week you're going to have a phony movie tomorrow night. Nobody
That's right, on the Discovery Channel.
Nobody.
And get this, Bill. Madeline actually wrote a book about this. It's called Texas in the Morning.
Yes.
6 weeks later at the Driscoll Hotel in Austin, Texas on New Year's Eve, she had a rendezvous with Lyndon, and she confronted him with rumors that were rampant in Dallas at the time that he'd been involved since no one stood to gain more personally. And he told her that the CIA and the oil boys had decided that Jack had to be taken out.
Well, I rest my case.
This has been confirmed, by the way, by Billy Saul Estes, who has published a book recently entitled A Texas Legend, where Billy Saul said that he had had conversations with Cliff Carter and with Malcolm Mack Wallace, a guy that Lyndon had used to kill quite a few people, as many as a dozen, including one of his sisters, oddly enough. Cliff Carter, he said, had been sent by Lyndon down to Dallas to make sure that all the arrangements were in place for the assassination.
Jim, hang on to that thought. I got to go to break. They're throwing rocks at me in here. We'll go to break. Be right back. Don't go away. Don't take your seatbelts off. We'll be right here when you get back in the Scizone. Bill Cheers back in the Scizone with my guest tonight, Jim Fetzer. Jim, your books are available. And by the way, you're coming out with a new DVD, the JFK Assassination Cover-Up.
The DVD, yes, I have created a VHS. It's called JFK, The Assassination, The Cover-Up, and Beyond. It runs 4.5 hours. What I'm doing now, Bill, is turning it into a DVD because everyone likes to have a DVD. Now, you can get the books. You can get the books at Amazon.com.
Okay.
But to get the DVD, you got to write to Assassination Research. Shall I give the address?
Absolutely.
Assassination Research, 800 Violet Lane, Oregon. That's a city. Oregon, Wisconsin, 53575. 53575. And if you make out a check to Assassination Research for $20, specify whether you want the DVD or the VHS, and that will include shipping and handling, and within 2 weeks you'll have it in your hands.
All right, we'll go back to the phones, and by the way, I've got a clip of that. I want to run that when we get done with the phones here after the next break. Let's go to Don, been standing by the longest. Don, you're there, sir. Go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you both?
Glad to have you aboard, sir.
Question for you. Bill, you had said, where was I when JFK was assassinated?
Sure.
All of us. I was in 7th grade. It shocked me. Something like that really blew me away at that young age. And I always asked my dad, my mom, any elder, what caused all this? What brought this into being? Now, my dad wasn't a college man, but he was very good common sense.
My dad, too. Go ahead.
And he said, I'll tell you what I honestly believe and what I've heard. He says he had 2 swords already stuck in his back, one from Johnson, one from Hoover. There was no love lost. He said, but I suspect deep down in, if you look really deep enough, you'll find that there was hierarchy using the government officials to do their foul play.
You got to understand, this is the first time that's happened in some time modern history.
Right.
But I appreciate it, Don. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I remember, Jim, talking to my dad. He and I were sitting talking, just like Don's dad. He said, I said, Dad, what do you think about it? And being that dry kind of slow, anticipated thing, he said, all you got to do, son, is follow the money. And boy, he was dead on it with that, Jim. I ain't kidding you.
In this case, it had a whole lot to do with following the power, Bill.
Absolutely.
Jack was wanting to cut the oil depletion allowance, which those Texas oilmen thought was their divine right, a massive tax write-off on the ground that pumping oil out of the ground when it's a finite resource, they were putting themselves out of business. Jack wanted to cut that. He thought it was unfair. He wanted to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. He'd been misled by them at the Bay of Pigs. Very embarrassing. They were trying to trap him into sending in the American military, which he refused to do. The Joint Chiefs were very upset by Jack for not only for not attacking Cuba, but for signing an above-ground test ban treaty with the Soviet Union. They had all opposed it, and now he was going to pull our forces out of Vietnam, where they thought a stand had to be taken against the expansion of international godless communism. The mob was upset with Jack. They wanted to regain the resorts and casinos in Havana, where they were running the biggest money laundering operation in the Western Hemisphere. Lyndon wanted to become president of all the people. Hoover wanted to stay on as director of the FBI. I think he had the Oval Office bugged. He knew Jack wanted to retire him. Jack had already told his personal secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, he wasn't going to run with Lyndon again.
All right.
Lyndon saw his opportunities slipping through his fingers.
That's exactly what it was. Let's go. Mink, you're up, sir. Go ahead. Glad to have you aboard.
How are you tonight?
Doing well, sir. Go right ahead.
Yes, Jim. Jim, let me tell you, and you too, Bill, I'm a third cousin to Lyndon Baines Johnson. My dad's a World War II veteran. He's 85 years old. He's a second. I met him when I was a kid when he worked in the Senate. Now, I was barely old enough to remember it, but I shook his hand. I have a question for you, Jim. You alluded to the car a few minutes ago on Bill's show.
Yes.
Where is that car today?
Well, I think it's in a Ford museum, if I'm not mistaken, in Dearborn. But what Lyndon did was have the car stripped down, completely destroyed as evidence. This was a crime scene on wheels. On Monday, after the assassination, it was completely stripped down. They replaced the windshield, which had a through-and-through hole in it because Jack was shot in the throat by a bullet that went through the windshield. He was shot in the back from behind, about 5.5 inches down below his collar. And then, you won't believe this, but after the driver pulled the limousine to the left into a halt, he was shot twice in the head, once from behind. He fell forward. Jackie was easing him up, looking him right in the face when he was hitting the right temple with that bullet I described before, was a frangible or exploding bullet that blew his brains out the back of his head. Lyndon actually had the vehicle returned to service for the government, but he never rode in it.
Do you know where it was bulletproofed when it came from Ford Motor Company? Bill, you probably know it was locally.
Yeah, Hess and what's the name of it? Right there in Cincinnati.
Hess and Eisenhower.
All right.
Hess and Eisenhower.
We'll do it.
Good show. I look forward to reading your stuff, Jim. And,
terrific. Thanks for the call. Great question.
Good question, Mink. Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
We'll take a pause the action, I guess, right now. Is that what we do? Let's do that pause the action. We'll be right back. And when we come back, we'll start out with that tape.
Even from me, without independent corroborating evidence. That includes what you find in the newspapers. Gary Trudeau, for example, recently devoted Doonesbury to an examination of the assassination, which he concluded, as these panels show, with a comparison of the official Warren Commission report, in which Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone, demented gunman, fires 3 shots with a high-velocity rifle from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building, scoring 2 hits, killing the president and wounding the governor of Texas, with what he refers to as a composite conspiracy scenario involving at least 4 presumably non-demented shooters who fire 8 shots and achieve the same result, but where the number of conspirators is in the hundreds. Now, the point Doonesbury is making, no doubt, is that the official Warren report provides a far simpler explanation of events in Dallas that fateful day than does a conspiracy scenario. However, simpler accounts are to be preferred only if they are also adequate. For example, the Warren Commission was never able to successfully identify either motive or means or opportunity in the case of Oswald. Within 90 seconds of the assassination, for example, he was observed on the 2nd floor of the School Book Depository building drinking a Coke by a motorcycle patrolman and by his supervisor in the School Book Depository building. But if he was on the 2nd floor drinking a Coke, he could not also have been on the 6th floor firing at the president. Plus, in order to account for all the wounds that were sustained by the president and the governor on the basis of only 2 bullets, the commission was forced to conclude that one of these bullets had entered the president's back, exited his throat, entered the governor's back, shattered a rib, exited his chest, had shattered his wrist, and wound up impacting in his thigh. A bullet which, nevertheless, turned out to be virtually free from deformity and has come to be known, therefore, as the magic bullet. 75 to 85% of the American public have remained skeptical of the Warren report and don't accept it. In fact, although Gary Trudeau does not make this point, neither does the American government. The assassination was reinvestigated by the House Select Committee on Assassinations from 1977 to 1979 and concluded that, in fact, there had been at least 2 shooters firing at least 4 bullets in Dealey Plaza on that fateful day. This scenario, in fact, is not very different from the conspiracy scenario that was advanced by Josiah Thompson in his book 6 Seconds in Dallas and covered in the Saturday Evening Post on the 2nd of November, 1967. According to Josiah Thompson's scenario, there were 3 shooters firing at the president who fired 4 shots, each of which hit. So the principal difference between the House Select Committee on Assassinations report, which had 2 assassins firing 4 shots with 2 misses, and Josiah Thompson's scenario, 3 assassins firing 4 shots, all of which hit, is that on the Josiah Thompson scenario, the assassins are better shooters who make better shots.
Jim Fetzer, that's just a brief part of what's on your videotape.
That's right, Bill. And now, of course, we know actually there were shots fired from 6 different locations. It's really astounding.
I've got a lot of echo in my ear from you. Do you have speakers there or something? What is that?
No, Bill. I was just observing that our research now shows that there were 6 different firing locations. Jack himself was hit 4 different times. John Connolly anywhere from 1 to 3, and then there were 3 shots that missed, including one that hit a distant bystander by the name of James Tague.
Okay, let's go back to the phone lines. There's a phone line number 381-3838. If you want to jump in, please do. Let's go to Paul, been standing by the longest. Paul, you're on the air. Go ahead with Jim.
Good evening, Bill. How are you doing tonight?
Doing well, sir. Glad to have you.
Yeah, one of the things that you're missing on the point here was that Oswald's weapon was an Italian military rifle. I used to own one, and I've been a sniper on 2 SWAT teams. And I kid you not, one of the biggest red flags that ever got to me, and I remember I was in a junior high school when the assassination went down, is years later when I got it, it is probably one of the worst weapons for accuracy. And even the FBI reported that his scope was loosely mounted on the weapon.
Yeah.
And trying to do this with surplus military Italian ammo.
And didn't he have to shoot through the trees, guys? Was there something to do with the tree?
Yeah, there was a large live oak there, Bill.
A live oak, yeah.
Right. I mean, it's absurd to think he would have given up his best possible shots if he had been in the 6th floor window, which was as the limousine was coming up Houston right toward the book depository. The target's growing larger and larger. His chest and head would have been visible. And wait until the vehicle turns the corner and is driving away and he has to fire through a tree.
Literally, the tree does not shed its leaves until sometime in late in the year, and that's a part of it. Paul, I appreciate your input. Thank you, sir.
Well, he's absolutely right. The weapon was known as a piece of junk. It was called the humanitarian rifle in World War II for never actually hurting anyone on purpose.
Well, yeah, and one of the things, too, is him being a Marine and trained in sniper training, he would never have shot through a tree. He would have got himself a clear shot, so there would be no risk of deflection of the bullet.
Good point.
Yeah,
Good point.
Yeah, the fact is actually Oswald was trained with an M1, not with a bolt-action weapon. He wasn't trained to use a scope. He wasn't trained to fire at moving targets. I used to supervise recruit training at San Diego, the same recruit depot in Edston Range, the same rifle range where he took his training. And this is not a weapon that he had any experience with. He was a mediocre shot. He only barely qualified in 1959, dropping 21 points since he first qualified in 1957. There's no telling how bad a marksman he would have been at this period of time.
Somebody said he had Maggie's drawers, if you know what that means.
Right, that means a complete miss of the target at the firing range, Bill. A complete miss. They wave a white flag called Maggie's drawers.
Maggie's drawers. Don't shoot no more. We can save the ammo. Paul, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Have a good night, Bill.
Thank you, sir.
Call.
I can do that. And let's go to Sherry. Sherry, thank you for being there.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm all right. Good to have you.
I just wanted to let you know you've got a great show rolling, and you look exceptionally handsome this evening.
Oh, my goodness. You keep saying those sweet things. I got to go to break, Sherry, but I appreciate your kind words. Thank you, dear.
She better call again, Bill.
Yeah, please call again. By the way, there's the lines open at 381-3838 right here in the Scizone. Join us. We'll hear from you tonight. Jim Fetzer, my guest tonight, talking about JFK, the assassination, its cover-up. His books are available on Amazon.com, and if you want the DVD or the VHS, you can send a check made out to Assassination Research, 800 Violet Lane, Oregon. That's a city in Wisconsin. The zip code is 53575. And let me say something. When you put these books in your library, when your children start studying about this, they're going to get the facts, not innuendo. That's the important part. Jim, I want to thank you for all of your work. Let's take another phone call here. Let's go to Cynthia. Cynthia, you're on the air.
How are you doing tonight, Bill?
Phenomenally well, considering under the pressure.
Okay, I enjoy your show very much.
Well, I do too. Go ahead.
And I thank your guest also for the.
He's got
great information.
Great information, an amazing amount of research. It really went in. Thank you, Cynthia. Appreciate it.
Oh, wait a minute. I just wanted to ask.
Yes.
What happened to the witnesses?
What happened to them? Good question, Jim.
What was? I couldn't hear the question.
The question was, what happened to all the witnesses?
All the witnesses.
Yeah.
Well, this is interesting. When Johnson created the Warren Commission, he designated the FBI as the official investigative body, and they. Are we still there?
Hold on. Go ahead. She hung up, but.
Okay. The FBI was designated as the official investigative body, and then the Warren staff determined what witnesses would be heard by the commissioners, but they didn't interview the 10 witnesses who were closest to the Lincoln limousine when the assassination took place. And then they would ask other witnesses the wrong questions, and if finally, answers to appropriate questions got into the record, they changed the transcript. This was a pattern they used to filter out relevant information and keep it from the commissioners.
Unbelievable. Let's take a pause in the action while we got a break in the phone line. 381-3838, jump in. The phone lines are open. I'm Bill Boshears. This is the Scizone. Hope you guys are ready with that tape. Here we go. Done. Ta-da! I did it. Right here. Jim, I got a question for...
Asking about the dead witnesses, because more than 100 of these witnesses died unusual deaths. In
Absolutely.
fact, there's a whole book about it.
Jim, somebody called in off the break, or while we were on the breaks. First one called in. His relatives changed the windshield. I'm just going to call him John because I don't know. Yeah. It actually had the bullet hole in it. They're the family that changed it. And secondly, a question just came in. Jim, what happened to all the Secret Service guys that was around Kennedy? Are they just sort of still wandering around, or are they dead? Or do you know?
Well, there were a couple who played key roles. Emory Roberts was in charge of the Secret Service detail protecting the president. He left two agents who should have been riding on the back of the vehicle at Love Field where the plane landed. He left two of them there. Then when John Reddy, who was an agent on the right running board, started to rush forward to protect Jackie, called him back. Clint Hill was allowed to rush forward, but that was to protect Jackie, not to protect Jack. William Greer, the driver, actually pulled the limousine to the left and to a halt to make sure that Jack would be killed. This was unbelievable. And there was an agent by the name of Boring at the back in Washington who appears to have played a key role too. There's a chapter about this and about the windshield in the limousine and murder in Dealey Plaza.
All right. Let's go back to the phones. People have been there the longest. Let's go to Norm. You're on the air with Jim Fetzer. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bill, I was working at the Museum of Natural History when the assassination happened.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing, and Jim, I don't know whether you've heard this or not, they played a recording of Johnson calling Jacqueline Kennedy.
Yes.
On this thing. It was almost obscene. Do you remember that?
Can you tell me more? Do you have more details?
No, I just remember it aired on the Cincinnati stations, and they said that he was supposedly calling her to give his condolences about Jack being killed, and they played that tape on the thing. It was, I mean, he almost asked her to go to bed with him.
Well, Johnson was that kind of a guy. He claimed he'd had more women by accident than Jack had on purpose, and it may well have been true.
Mm-hmm.
He had Jackie come up, to be sworn in on the plane before it took off from Love Field, claiming that the Attorney General had instructed them to do that, but that turned out to be false information. Bobby had said no such thing. So Lyndon was, in his characteristic way, manipulating the situation.
I appreciate it, Norm. Thank you, sir. Let's go to, I believe it's Barbara. Barbara, you're in the air with Jim Fetzer. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I was just calling in to say that I was actually watching TV when it occurred. And I was in Toledo, Ohio at the time, living there. And I had a black and white TV set. And
we all did.
Excuse me?
We all did.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I remembered seeing, right after it happened and the cameras were panning the area, a man, on the back of a man, running over a grassy knoll. It looked like he was carrying a long rifle and it was smoking. And I watched it with considerable interest because I thought, isn't that strange? And for years I said that I had seen this on TV. There was no report of it on the news. There was nothing that came out in print. And even my own children said, Mother, you must have been imagining it. And I said, no, I didn't. I know what I saw because I was feeding my one-month-old son at the time, who was exactly 1 month old on the 22nd of November. And then years and years later it came out that there, in fact, was a man on the grassy knoll. And there was a report given about who they thought it might have been and so forth. But for years, nobody ever mentioned ever seeing anything like that, but it was on TV.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. You know, Jim, the American public is so astute. They have been there. They've done that. Sooner or later, there's going to be a backlash to the government and its cover-ups and the way that it handles stuff. For all the way from Kennedy all the way through 9/11. It is absolutely amazing. Flight 400, another one. Hundreds and hundreds of people were not allowed to testify.
You probably mean Flight 800, yeah.
800, I'm sorry, you're right, 800. Jim, this is so involved. If you're available next week and not on the road traveling, could we hook up again? I'd like to do this again and get the Mannlicher Carcano rifle in here, and we'll go over that and take people's phone calls and everything else. Will you be?
I'll be in Washington. I'll be in Washington, D.C. I'm giving a talk on this subject at the National Press Club on Wednesday.
Okay.
And let's see if we can't work that out. I'd be glad to come back, Bill.
Love to have you. You take care. Stay safe, my friend, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks so very much.
You got it. That was Jim Fetzer. He is, he's gone. But your phone call, we'll take that. Let's go to Christy. You're on the air.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, sir. My dad was Lee Harvey Oswald, last commanding officer in the Marine Corps.
Uh-huh.
And I beg to differ with the gentleman that said that he was a terrible shot, because my dad always believed that it was a conspiracy, because he was actually one of the best marksmen my dad had ever taught. And,
okay. Well, you know what? You're the first person I've ever heard say that.
Well, I mean, I don't understand why it would be that way unless it is a cover-up, because my father was, you know, his commanding officer. And
what was your father's name? I'm sorry.
I don't know. Should I tell it on the air?
Well, sure. What's
Donald Helgeson.
Okay.
And he was a marksman, or he taught. He was a sharpshooting instructor, and Lee Harvey Oswald was under his command. So
your father says he was a crack shot.
Absolutely.
Well, was he a crack shot with a Mannlicher Carcano rifle?
I don't know.
All
I know is that my father thought that, you know, why would he have been, you know, more or less recruited? He thought that the government did have some hand in it.
Oh, I'm sure your father was right. I agree with your father 1,000%. Christy, thank you, and tell your father thank you.
Okay.
Gotcha.
All right, bye.
Bye. The American public is aware. Things are changing in this country at a pace that is, without a doubt, the most staggering. There are events happening right now in this country that will never make it to the news media. Tonight we have looked at only a small fraction of where it began. In my opinion, it began with the assassination of JFK, and when they decided they could do that, they've decided ever since then to overrun the American public and do any damn thing they want to. They, meaning the government. We had a president elected on drugs, dope, and the airplane still landed in Mena, Arkansas. It was a black bag operation, still is. George Bush was in on it and knew about it. And all this holier-than-thou stuff that people declare that, oh, it's just a conspiracy, Boshears, and you're dreaming. Well, there's enough people out there that know the truth, and we try to look at it here every week, along with you, your ideas, and your opinions. This is what we call the Scizone. And it's going to change, but you're a part of it. You're causing the change, unlike any other time in history. You're going to see most of it right here. And by the way, what we'll be doing is telling you about it before it happens. That's the interesting part. Being able to see it and hear it and have an input to it. That's what it's all about. This is the only live national call-in talk show in America that allows you to get involved. Thank you for joining me. Be here next week in the Scizone at Eastern Standard Time, 11 o'clock. Thank you for joining me.